Welcome to my video. First, who am I? The answer is, just one of a few robotic voices who will be doing the rounds. But who is the author? Just an ordinary gentleman called Stefan, British-born to parents from the former Yugoslavia. These videos aim to explain subjects of a political theme often discussed in current affairs and in YouTube videos, but rarely precise while always pushing some form of agenda. The giveaway sign of inaccuracy is when one resorts to the common but lazy word, complicated. That region's affairs are virtually always complicated. And why are they complicated? Perhaps because the narrator is not telling the whole story. Perhaps even the so-called experts leave out uncomfortable actualities, which means questions remain unanswered. People with a genuine interest somehow run into a wall. And the only way around it is...
It does, and it doesn't make sense at the same time. It's just complicated, I guess.
Well, I'm here to tell you, no, it isn't. Things could hardly be more straightforward. While most of my videos focus on some element of the former Yugoslavia, some are based away from this region. Now, let me clarify that the author is not a historian, nor a scholar, and does not claim to be qualified in anything that goes out from these videos. He is merely an enthusiast who spends a lot of time and effort deconstructing common narratives. Don't let that put you off, for his message to you is exactly what every professional worth his weight in gold ought to be saying, though few actually will. Don't believe what I tell you. Instead, research for yourself the things you're hearing. And if I've got something wrong, then feel free to collate your own evidence, link it if you can, or if not, just mention it in the comments whereupon the author will happily explore it. In the previous video, I briefly explored the Slavic Macedonians as a people. The challenges they have faced for being a Slavic people and choosing a national name that is not Slav-derived, and how this should not really have ruffled the feathers of their Bulgarian Slavic counterparts, nor their Greek neighbors. And further regarding Greeks, the apologia on behalf of Slavic people using the name Macedonian was not in any way contrived to diminish the Greek position, deny its own historical association with Macedonia, to object to the modern Greek republic's north being called Macedonia, or remotely even imply the Slavic people are right and the Greeks are wrong. Perish that thought. Today we look at the journey taken by the Republic itself, which since 2019, many know by its constitutional name, Republic of North Macedonia. We look at the implications, the intricacies, and reflect on why you should not use this name with the local people if you should ever visit the land. A caveat, that this video contains more political references and scrutiny than the previous one, which merely examined those who identify as Macedonian in the present day. First, let's explore what is meant by modern-day Macedonia, and since when. Asides the territory which broke away from Yugoslavia in 1991, known as Vardar Macedonia, the overall wider region of Macedonia includes Aegean Macedonia in northern Greece, and Pirin Macedonia in southwestern Bulgaria. As broached in the previous video, this is not consistent with the ancient Macedonia associated with the Greek nation, but nor was it intended to be. The name Macedonia was recorded, but otherwise dormant for many centuries. Then, from the 19th century, the term became reawakened by two simultaneous, yet mutually exclusive, occurrences. So much so, that it would need someone who studies such events more meticulously than the author to actually say which came first. But they are both significant. The first of these examples concerned the local population, where people quietly began to apply the demonym Macedonian in reference to themselves. The second example, oddly, involved Western cartographers, people who are removed from the region and its peoples. The land in question was microcosmic of a wider Ottoman territory known as Rumelia. For all of the Ottoman Empire's subdivisions, Western cartographers began naming the region in question, Macedonia, despite the name Macedonia having had no binding status within the Ottoman Empire. The German geographer Heinrich Kiepert's 1867 map is among the earliest to demarcate Macedonia. Before this, the Austrian geologist Amy Boo had, in the 1830s, written to describe inhabitants of Macedonia, even though the term was not being used as an ethnic designation by any of its population. Worth noting is how the term Macedonian was not, in the first instance, adopted to imply an all-out ethnicity. It was originally an umbrella term for other context-dependent local affiliations such as Bulgarian, Serb, Albanian, or Vla. Many decades would pass before those Slavic people within the region decided, we are ethnically Macedonian, and not Bulgarian, nor Serb, nor anything else. To stay on topic, there is no real reason to go into how the territory ended up divided among the different countries, not at least in this video, and so we jump straight to the name change to quote-unquote, North Macedonia, look at the official reasoning, and then work our way in reverse to obviate the sticking points. Let's begin with the sanitized, PR-approved narrative as sold in Western mainstream media, and by the Western regimes, including their think tanks, the NGOs which receive funding from the West, and so forth. First,
by 2018, the Republic of Macedonia, which broke from Yugoslavia in 1991, had been embroiled in a 27-year naming dispute with Greece, a country whose own northern sector is called Macedonia, and a nation with historical links to the ancient Macedonia. Therefore, the Republic of Macedonia needed to modify its name.
Modify its name for what? Did the two nations really have a quote-unquote dispute? Or did one government merely have a personal objection to how the other called itself? Be that as it may, in 2018 this objection was not exactly 27 years young, as sources claim. As acknowledged in the previous video, this Macedonian entity, along with its borders and legal personality, date to 1944, within democratic federal Yugoslavia, as it was constitutionally known then. This was also the year that the Macedonian language became standardized, based on the dialect of its southern central region, and made a national language, while ethnic Macedonians in turn were admitted as a constituent nation of Yugoslavia. Greece did not like this, right from the 1940s, but not many people knew. The reality was, however you look at it, that despite the name being Yugoslavia, Macedonian was publicly named as a national language, spoken by, not just a recognized, but constitutional ethnicity living in a territory bearing the same name. The proliferation of Macedonian identity around the globe was exactly as it would have been if Macedonia were independent. Language courses in Macedonian for the diaspora suddenly became available throughout the world, while Yugoslavia internally developed a four-language written model, that is, Slovene, Macedonian, Croatian and Serbian, for all areas of public life. This stretches from banknotes to visa details which were entered into foreign passports. Atlases and encyclopedias, school textbooks internationally and all manner of reports and published spreadsheets, named Macedonian as a Slavic language, spoken by Macedonians, a Slavic people, in a land called Macedonia, a partner in a Slavic union. The name of the country made no difference. None. And yet, Macedonia could still have formed part of the country title. To demonstrate this, take the final 3 years of a Yugoslav state. In February 2003, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which consisted of Montenegro and Serbia only, was reconstituted as the state union of Serbia and Montenegro. So, had Macedonia not left the union in 1991, then this country could just as easily have been called Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia. Either way, regardless of the name and the time of Macedonia's exit, Yugoslavia until 1991 had always instantiated Macedonia plus 5. Ergo, the state union of Serbia and Montenegro was Serbia plus 1 or Montenegro plus 1. For what in the decades following World War II was only whimpering from Greece, those whimpers turned into screams from 1991. Now, Greece has finally exposed its own emotional liability for the eyes of the world. Greece's first action was to forbid any holder of the new Macedonian passports from entering Greece. They also blocked independent Macedonia's accession to the United Nations. However, regarding the so-called dispute with Greece, the country was admitted to the UN in 1993 using the name Former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Ostensibly, for people not to confuse the country which, still, bore the constitutional name Republic of Macedonia, with an area of northern Greece. And who in his right mind would confuse a country with one name with a territory inside another that he has no reason to even be aware of? The UN already contains examples of countries who have the very same name. There are 2 Congos. As such, they are represented by their constitutional names, Democratic Republic of the Congo, while the other is simply the Republic of the Congo. Then, within the UN, 2 countries contain the name, Korea. 3 have the name, Guinea, and regarding constitutional long forms, 2 countries contain the word, Ireland. But there has never to date been another Macedonia forming the part of someone's name. As for the name of the country sharing its name with a region within a neighboring state, again, Macedonia has never stood alone. Mention the name, Luxembourg, and immediately, one thinks of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, a landlocked state in the Low Countries region. Its neighbour, Belgium, has never thrown its toys out of the pram over the fact that its own southeastern province in Wallonia happens to be called Luxembourg, and is slightly larger in landmass than the independent country. Moldova, a term synonymous with Moldavia, shares a border with Romania, and specifically, the Moldavia region of Romania. And the closest example yet, Azerbaijan as a large area with Iran versus the neighboring independent Azerbaijan, but never any toddler tantrums from Iran that its neighbor be forced to use the name former Soviet Socialist Republic of Azerbaijan. Then further afield, we have Georgia, a country in the Caucasus versus the state of Georgia in the US, and other similar examples. Either way, that was that. Then in 1995 came another development. Greece finally opened its borders to Republic of Macedonia citizens by introducing a visa scheme, while vehicles having entered from Macedonia were not permitted to display the country code, MK. As years went by, this would all soften, partly because the Skopje regime was openly aspiring to join the EU, while centralized EU policy wrested away the autonomy of its member states, so that a few years later, Macedonians could enter Greece without a visa. Greece's independence severely undermined, though even without such policies dictated from Brussels. The fact remains that insofar as the naming objection had resulted in poor relations between Greece and its neighbor, the 2 nations had by 1995 bilaterally arrived at a working model, no matter how inconvenient for Macedonians needing to enter Greece. A quick note that Greek citizens were at all times welcome to enter the Republic of Macedonia and no visa was required. Ergo, in 2018, the so-called naming dispute was not an obstacle to Greek-Macedonian relations. But the argument continues.
Well, in 2018, the problem was not Greek-Macedonian bilateral relations per se. Those had indeed been resolved down the years, but that didn't mean Greece was happy for its northern neighbor to be called Macedonia. But Macedonians wished to join the EU and NATO, of whom both Greece is a member, and was thereby using its veto to stop Macedonia from entering. By 2018, the Greek government had accepted that Macedonia could enter, provided its name contain a qualifier rather than drop the word Macedonia entirely.
Well, that's a bit more serious. We can't disappoint an entire nation wishing to join the EU and NATO now. So, how did we know Macedonians wished to join the EU?
According to the International Republican Institute, in surveys conducted June to July 2018, 1,100 adults were asked their opinions, of which 83% supported EU membership, up from 77% in 2017. 77% supported NATO membership. 57% favored resolving the naming issue under the new name Republic of North Macedonia, believing it justified accession.
For the record, the International Research Institute is funded by the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID, as in the United States Agency for International Development. Put simply, that means the US State Department. Can you thereby trust the Pentagon regime to report truthfully that a majority from an ex-socialist bloc nation might just not favor NATO or its economic ally across the North Atlantic, the EU? Well, you shouldn't. Let's for a moment discard the claim of 83% wishing to join the EU in 2018, and the 77% wishing to join NATO, and focus only on the 57%, as claimed by the IRI, who allegedly replied that they would accept the new name, Republic of North Macedonia, on the proviso that doing so would guarantee accession. How does this map onto the facts? The first projection that Macedonia could be changing its name to North Macedonia, for the purpose of accession to NATO and the EU, was pitched in the Prespa Agreement. whereby Greek and Macedonians signed on the deal, supervised by representatives of the UN, and in particular, the EU, most notably, the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini, and the European Commissioner for Enlargement and European Neighbourhood Policy, Johannes Hahn. Quite an entourage. The then Macedonian Prime Minister, Zoran Zaev, agreed to put the proposal to the nation in a referendum, promising to abide by the result. That day came on the 30th of September 2018, when a referendum was held on the matter. The question being,
are you in favour of European Union and NATO membership by accepting the agreement between the Republic of Macedonia and the Republic of Greece?
A loaded question without equivocation. It does not mention the name change proposal, but instead alludes to it by labelling the Prespa agreement as the mere agreement between the republics. But then nor does it ask the respondent what he even thinks about the agreement. The question was whether you want EU and NATO membership, and specifically, by accepting the agreement in question. A loaded question is one in which a presupposition is embedded within the question. So, if I were to ask you, do you still drink and drive? You could neither say yes nor no, without tacitly acceding to the premise that you drive vehicles while over the legal alcohol limit. In brief, do you want EU and NATO membership by changing name to North Macedonia? Is your answer no? Okay. Well, how then would you like to join them both? You see, the question was framed to preclude the respondent from stating that he does not wish to join NATO or the EU, or likewise, that he might be happy to join the EU, but not NATO. Rejecting NATO and EU membership simply was not an option. Or was it? Reported in international news around the world in the summer of 2018 in the wake of the Prespa agreement, had been gathering masses in all of Macedonia's towns and cities, as well as in the United States, Canada, and Australia, where the Macedonian diaspora have voting rights, where the protesters held posters containing the words, Neg Lasum. That's Macedonian for, I'm not voting. These demonstrators were making their sentiment clear that nobody gave the regime in Skopje the right to change their name, while on the day of the race, they would boycott the referendum. Referendum Day happened on the 30th of September 2018. 94.18% voted yes. 5.82% voted no. And this is from 97.11% of the votes cast. Now, given the loaded question put to the voter, a yes vote and a no vote amount to the same thing. By saying one or the other, you admit supporting your country's accession into both NATO and the EU, albeit with a disproportionately higher number liking the agreement between the nations, whatever that may mean. Yet despite the seemingly impressive figure, the proposal could not be validated by the Zaev regime. That is because the demonstrators across the country, as well as in the diaspora, turned out to be the real majority. For turnout was a mere 36.89%, well short of the 50% required by the Constitution for onward action. A clear majority had voted with their feet, and not for reasons of personal apathy. The figures were not contested by Zoran Zaev's regime. So, bang goes your IRI survey, which sold to the world that 57% of Macedonians not only desired to join both NATO and the EU, but were prepared to change their name to North Macedonia to enable the process. Before the referendum, British broadsheet journals not showing pictures of the demonstrators reported that there had been protests rallying for boycott and dismissed the numbers as small. Even then, came the concomitant accusations of quote-unquote Kremlin meddling, as though a Macedonian had needed the Russian government to advise him that the name for his country should stay what it had been since he could likely remember. As though the drive to push Macedonian citizens toward NATO and the EU in no way involved Western figures, not even those who helped broker the Prespa agreement. So what next? To recap, an attempt had been made by Zoran Zaev's regime, his new Greek friends and his EU and NATO backers to coerce the nation into accepting the name change, NATO and EU membership. Yet through the boycott, the nation rejected the three pillars in one fell swoop, and are supported by legislation. Well, we all know Article 2 of the Lisbon Treaty, and how the EU just loves rule of law. We know how the Pentagon regime also, no matter whether ruled by Republicrat or Republican, goes into spasm over the quote-unquote will of the people or quote-unquote democracy. So, the Zaev regime will accept that its people have made clear their voice and will move on in accordance with their avowed desires. Right? Wrong. Enter Plan B. Will of the people, rule of law and democracy are all a beautiful thing. But the Zaev regime and his Western handlers would never allow silly little things like this to frustrate their pre-vetted agenda. Together, this cartel would add another page to the rulebook and look to retrospectively amend the constitution to see that the voice of the people is tossed to the slag heap in the name of accommodating the imperatives of Zaev and his paymasters. From the referendum fiasco, Zaev moved to the more docile parliament. A two-third majority was all that was needed, but from merely 120 MPs. A figure far more tractable than the 1.8 million who were eligible to vote. In October 2018, Parliament began with constitutional amendments, a process which was completed in January 2019, when 81 of the 120 MPs approved the constitutional changes. But why don't we remind ourselves of the events that led to this milestone? The US Secretary of Defense James Mattis spoke brazenly about so-called Russian meddling in the Macedonian affairs, a claim to carry the burden of proof. Curiously, Mattis had been among several senior functionaries in the West to visit Skopje in the lead-up to the parliamentary vote. The others included German Chancellor Angela Merkel, NATO's Jens Stoltenberg, and EU Commissioner and co-curator of the Prespa Agreement, Johannes Hahn. Likewise, United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Matthew Palmer made multiple visits to Skopje urging MPs to vote yes. Also, reported in Macedonian media, was Ambassador Jess Bailey being accused of personally lobbying and pressuring MPs behind closed doors. This was heavily covered in local media, though often ignored outside Macedonia. Now, Russian meddling or not, this motley crew may have engaged with Macedonia's parliament for many reasons, but urging them to vote with their conscience, and if need be, place the EU and NATO on the back burner, sure wasn't one of them. Not after the regime in Skopje rides roughshod over the majority, while not a whimper from any Western official over this injustice. This level of diplomatic presence and messaging witnessed was unprecedented for such a small country, and indicates an unequivocal, coordinated campaign. Also worth adducing: leaked or public reports of deals and blackmail. 8 MPs from opposition party, the VMRO, mysteriously changed sides and voted in favor of the name change. Local media and international observers further reported offers of amnesty for corruption charges, some having had pending court cases, rumors of pressure or surveillance leaks, and further reports of parliamentary immunity being threatened if they refused to comply. The Macedonian journalists Borian Jovanovski and Mary Jordanovska openly discussed foreign pressure, and in particular, cited the suspiciously timed deals and defections. And so, the day came on the 12th of February 2019. The Zoran Zaev regime bypassed the nation and declared the Republic of North Macedonia. Just over a year later, so-called North Macedonia was shoehorned into NATO to absolute zero fanfare. The official excuse? COVID, lockdown, restrictions. And yet, even from home, behind screens, behind masks, there were no celebrations. Not online, not in family circles. Not a murmur of pride, not a whisper of joy. No NATO or US flags in windows. No glasses raised. No historic moment memes. Just silence. While the masses were able to gather, the mantra was translated: never North, only Macedonia. The disconnect between the actions of the ruling classes and national sentiment has now led many to deduce that the independence as declared on the 8th of September 1991 officially ended on the 12th of February 2019. You simply cannot blame them for feeling that the Skopje regime has become an occupier. There was no condition on the Socialist Republic of Macedonia to change or modify its name between 1944 and 1991, or risk being expelled from Yugoslavia. And speaking of expulsion, prior to Yugoslavia being removed forcibly from Cominform in 1948 amid growing tension between Tito and Stalin, the Yugoslav and Soviet leaders respectively, any doubts over Macedonia's name and status were never on the table. Per the previous video, Greeks say that their northern neighbors, whom they don't call Macedonian, are just Slavs. Well, in that case, don't pretend to be shocked when Macedonians who gather in masses may also raise the flag of their fellow Slavic nation, the Russians. And as for the so-called protection from NATO, in other words, a full 2% of the national GDP expected to be put aside annually for the eventual humiliation of the US jackboot smearing its fecal matter up and down the land. Well, should the Russian tanks roll in, then many Macedonians already have the flowers to toss to their pathway. Now, whoever you may be, feel free to think whatever you like about the Russian Federation. From the Slavic Macedonian perspective, no Russian or Soviet leader in the 81 years from 1944 to the time of this video ever made the Macedonians change their name. No Russians influenced Macedonia to lift the death penalty on a person found guilty of massacring your family in front of your eyes. And no quote-unquote Kremlin meddling is the reason for birthing units in maternity wards to dispense with the traditional mother and father in favor of parent 1 and parent 2, not that the author of this video knows which is which. He has a son, and knows himself only to be the dad. And all just to satisfy the hypersensitivities of the champions of the Rainbow Revolution. The problem here is that these crusaders are entirely based outside of Macedonia, and outside of the entire ex-socialist bloc for that matter, mostly all originating from, and operating from within, the collective West. Meanwhile, the Macedonian nation itself does not subscribe to such, quote-unquote, values, nor march in lockstep with those woketards. Much as Russian interference was not the reason that first graders, those aged 6 to 7, returned home from their first day in school in 2023 with textbooks, inside which families were horrified to discover illustrations of same-sex, quote-unquote, parents, which is an abrupt departure from local values. And having been sneaked into the books, covertly, and without consultation, and all in the hope of indoctrinating the children from as young an age as possible, to believe this is normal and should not be questioned. But if you're a vlogger, or a travel writer, then think, if you visit Macedonia, how you address the name of the place. There is a need to be sensitive everywhere, and if you're in Greece, then naturally, respect the Greek outlook. Though if you cross into pre-1991 Yugoslavia, you decide, are you there to insult the supermajority with the name North Macedonia, whereby you align yourself to the regime which has left its people hung out to dry, or have you come to enjoy what the nation has to offer? If it is the politics that interests you, then you might be better off sticking to your North Macedonian embassy in your country. But if it is the lived experience of enjoying what is provided by the people, then remember that you are within the realm of that nation, and that nation in turn continues to call itself Macedonia unsparingly. From fridge magnets to t-shirts in souvenir shops, you only see the word Macedonia by itself. Macedonians are not alone here, by the way. Any mention of their territory, in conversation and in publication, throughout the rest of the former Yugoslavia, still colloquially uses the term Macedonia. For example, when musicians from Croatia or Serbia announce on their websites that they are holding a gig at such and such a venue in Skopje, it will list this as Macedonia with no north. Nobody in his right mind is confused. You see, there is just one more elaborately complex detail behind the whole constitutional name chronicle. It's all good and well travel writers pottering into the country and hiding behind the name as listed on the map, or per its Wikipedia article title, or the Prespa Agreement, all as a half-baked pretext to spew North Macedonia, and then try to pretend that an entire nation embraces the name just as they should cherish being in NATO, while in 2025 also being candidates for EU membership. It's probable that such vloggers are already predisposed to NATO and the West, or just don't realize how much the Western playbook has influenced them. So when the term North Macedonia is being used so reflexively, one is either being dishonest or just lazy, because here is the reality behind the Prespa framework. The Prespa Agreement, for all its noise, did not erase the Macedonian people, the Macedonian language, or the culture. It only added North to the state name, yet even here, only in very specific, internationally facing contexts. Let's dive into an example. In the Euro 2020 Football Championships, held in 2021 because of the previous year's COVID disruptions, Euronews reported that the Greeks had spat their chips out when registering that Macedonian television had been overtly displaying the country code MKD on its digital live score, a reference to Macedonia without the North qualifier. How could this be? The authorities in Skopje responded that, per the PRESPA framework, representation of the country is only required to apply the North label when the body in question is in receipt of government funding. As such, the national football team is one such entity that does not do so, and thereby has no reason to be using the term North. So, is your sports media, when reporting international football, giving the name North Macedonia? Then they are wrong. They participate as Macedonia, even post-2019. In 2025, the governing body remains the FFM, Football Federation of Macedonia. Any further bleating in defense of this injudicious gesture, with arguments such as,
the official name of the country is North Macedonia, so reports internationally also have to go under the name North Macedonia.
Such intrusion is now political trespass. Nations of FIFA do not have to be consistent with sovereign borders. How else does the United Kingdom get 4 chances at winning each event through its individual participants of England, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland? Even Denmark gets a second crack of the whip. Asides the Danish national team, there is the Faroe Islands. Greenland too has a football team, while the island forms a part of Danish sovereignty, although Greenland is not a FIFA member. But I think the point now is clear. So, this wraps up the particulars behind the name North Macedonia. What it represents, how it came to be, who should use it, and more importantly, who does not have to use the term, and anyone to be watching this video will almost certainly belong to the second column. The next video will be the last 3 that focuses on the Macedonian people, and will explore their actual claims of who they are, and their arguments, in closer detail. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, and keep yourselves well. Until next time.